Deep in the collective memory of humanity lies a story so persistent, so universal, that it appears in nearly every corner of our world. From the rain-soaked mountains of ancient Mesopotamia to the vast plains of North America, from the sacred texts of India to the oral traditions of remote Pacific islands, the tale emerges again and again. It is the story of a great flood that once covered the earth, washing away an earlier world and leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild civilization from the ruins. The remarkable thing about these flood narratives is not simply their existence, but their extraordinary consistency across cultures that had no known contact with one another. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered the indigenous peoples of the Americas, they were astonished to find flood stories that bore striking similarities to the biblical account they knew from their own tradition. Missionaries in the Pacific discovered that island cultures scattered across thousands of miles of ocean all preserved tales of great waters that had once submerged the land. European explorers reaching the most remote corners of Africa, Asia, and Australia consistently found that local peoples had their own versions of the universal deluge. In the ancient city of Uruk, along the banks of the Euphrates River, scribes working by lamplight carved into clay tablets the adventures of Gilgamesh, the legendary king who sought immortality. Deep within this epic, composed perhaps 4,000 years ago, we encounter Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who recounts one of humanity's earliest recorded flood narratives. He tells of how the gods, troubled by humanity's noise and clamor, decided to destroy the world with a deluge of unimaginable proportions. Utnapishtim describes receiving divine warning through the god Ea, who whispered instructions through the reed walls of his house. Following these cryptic commands, he dismantled his dwelling and used its materials to build a massive cube-shaped vessel, coating it with bitumen to make it watertight. He gathered his family, his craftsmen, the seed of all living creatures, and loaded them aboard along with silver and gold. When the appointed time arrived, the storm god Adad thundered across the heavens, and the Anunnaki gods lifted their torches, setting the land ablaze with lightning. For 6 days and 7 nights, the hurricane raged. The flood tide covered everything like a blanket of war, and even the gods were terrified by the destruction they had unleashed. On the 7th day, the tempest calmed, and the sea became still. Utnapishtim opened a window of his vessel and saw that all humanity had returned to clay. The boat grounded on Mount Naimush, and after 7 more days, he released a dove, which returned finding no place to rest. Then he sent forth a swallow, which also came back. Finally, he released a raven, which found carrion and did not return, signaling that the waters had receded. The parallels to the biblical account of Noah are unmistakable, yet the Mesopotamian version predates the Hebrew scriptures by many centuries. This temporal precedence suggests that the flood narrative was already ancient when it was first committed to writing, passed from generation to generation through the flickering firelight of countless storytelling sessions in settlements along the great rivers of the Near East. In the Hebrew Bible, the flood story assumes profound theological significance that extends far beyond mere natural disaster. The book of Genesis describes a world that had grown corrupt and violent, where the divine beings known as the sons of God descended from heaven and took human women as wives, producing the Nephilim, a race of giants whose presence on earth seemed to represent a fundamental violation of the natural order. Seeing that every inclination of human thought was only evil continually, God resolved to cleanse the earth with water, preserving only the righteous Noah and his family along with representatives of all animal life. The biblical narrative provides specific measurements for Noah's Ark, describing it as 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, made of gopher wood and sealed with pitch. The vessel contained 3 decks and was equipped with a window and a door in its side. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell from heaven while the fountains of the great deep burst forth, covering even the highest mountains to a depth of 15 cubits. Every living thing that breathed air perished, save those sheltered within the ark. When the waters began to abate, Noah's vessel came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. He too sent forth birds to test whether the flood had ended, first a raven that flew back and forth until the waters dried up. then a dove that returned with an olive leaf in its beak, signaling that vegetation was emerging from the receding waters. When the dove failed to return on its third mission, Noah knew the earth was ready to support life once again. Across the vast expanse of the Indian subcontinent, Hindu tradition preserves its own version of the universal flood in the story of Manu, whose name echoes across multiple Puranic texts as both the first man and the progenitor of humanity. In the Matsya Purana, the tale begins when Manu, while performing his morning ablutions, saves a tiny fish from certain death in a small puddle. The grateful creature asks to be placed in a larger body of water, and as Manu complies, the fish grows exponentially, requiring ever larger vessels and eventually the entire ocean to contain it. The fish then reveals itself as Vishnu in his Matsya avatar and warns Manu of an approaching cosmic dissolution that will destroy all life. Following the deity's instructions, Manu constructs a great ship and gathers the 7 sages, seeds of all plants, and pairs of all animals. When the devastating flood arrives, covering the entire earth and dissolving the 3 worlds, Vishnu in his immense fish form appears with a horn protruding from his head. Manu ties his vessel to this horn with the cosmic serpent Vasuki serving as a rope, and the great fish tows them safely through the endless waters of destruction. During their voyage across the primordial ocean, Vishnu imparts to Manu and the sages the knowledge contained in the Vedas, ensuring that sacred wisdom will survive the cosmic catastrophe. When the waters finally recede and the new creation begins, Manu becomes the progenitor of the new human race, using his preserved knowledge to re-establish civilization and religious practice in the renewed world. The ancient Greeks wove their own flood narrative around the figures of Deucalion and Pyrrha, whose story bears remarkable similarities to accounts from other cultures, despite the geographic and cultural distance separating Greece from the Near East and India. According to Apollodorus and other classical sources, Zeus grew increasingly frustrated with the wickedness of the Bronze Age humans, particularly their impiety and violence. Deciding to destroy this corrupt generation, the king of the gods opened the heavens and sent torrential rains while Poseidon raised the seas to flood the earth. Deucalion, the son of Prometheus, had been warned by his foresighted father of the coming deluge. Following Prometheus's advice, he constructed a wooden chest or ark and stocked it with provisions. When the flood came, he and his wife Pyrrha alone survived, floating in their vessel for 9 days and nights until the waters subsided and their ark came to rest on Mount Parnassus, the sacred home of the Muses and Apollo. Emerging from their refuge into a world scoured clean of human life, Deucalion and Pyrrha faced the daunting task of repopulating the earth. They consulted the oracle of Themis at Delphi, who cryptically instructed them to throw the bones of their mother behind them as they walked. After puzzling over this command, they realized that Gaia, the earth itself, was the mother of all mortals, and her bones were the stones scattered across the landscape. As they cast stones over their shoulders, those thrown by Deucalion became men while those thrown by Pyrrha became women, thus restoring the human race to the cleansed earth. In the Americas, long before any European influence could have shaped their traditions, indigenous peoples across both continents preserved remarkably detailed flood narratives that often included elements strikingly similar to Old World accounts. The Cherokee spoke of a time when the earth was completely submerged beneath a great water, leaving only the animals who could swim or fly to survive above the surface. In their tradition, it was the water beetle who dove to the bottom of the endless ocean and brought up a small portion of mud, which then expanded to form the renewed earth. The Hopi of the American Southwest preserved perhaps one of the most elaborate flood traditions found anywhere in the world. According to their creation mythology, humanity has lived through several previous worlds, each of which was destroyed when people abandoned the spiritual path and fell into corruption. In the narrative of the Third World, which was destroyed by flood, the few righteous people were warned by Spider Grandmother to take refuge in hollow reeds, which served as vessels to carry them safely across the waters to the Fourth World where we now live. Aztec and other Mesoamerican civilizations incorporated flood narratives into their complex cosmological systems, describing multiple world ages that ended in various catastrophes. According to the Aztec creation myth recorded in sources like the Codex Chimalpopoca, the Fourth World Age, called Nahui Atl or Forewater, ended when Tlaloc, the rain god, sent a great flood that lasted for 52 years. Only those humans who were transformed into fish survived this aquatic apocalypse. The fifth and current world age began when the gods gathered at Teotihuacan and sacrificed themselves to create the sun and moon that now govern our existence. Native American tribes across the Great Plains, the Pacific Northwest, and the eastern woodlands all maintained their own versions of the universal flood story. The Ojibwe told of Nanabojo, a cultural hero who survived a great flood and worked with various animals to retrieve earth from beneath the waters. The Lakota preserved the story of a great flood survived by only one virtuous woman from whom the tribe descended. Pacific Northwest peoples like the Quinault described how Raven, their trickster creator figure, survived a worldwide flood and helped renew life on Earth. Even in the remote reaches of the Pacific, isolated island cultures maintained flood traditions that suggested a shared ancient memory. The Maori of New Zealand spoke of Tauhira Matea, the god of weather, who sent great waters to flood the land. Hawaiian tradition preserved the story of Nu, who survived a great flood by building a large vessel, taking his family and animals aboard, and floating until the waters receded. Australian Aboriginal cultures, with their extraordinarily ancient oral traditions stretching back tens of thousands of years, included flood stories in their Dreamtime narratives, describing how ancestral beings survived great waters that covered the land. In China, the figure of Yu the Great looms large in early historical records as the heroic emperor who tamed the cosmic floods that had plagued the world for generations. Ancient Chinese texts like the Book of Documents describe these primordial waters as covering the land so completely that people were forced to live in mountain caves and tree branches. The floods persisted through multiple generations until Yu undertook his monumental engineering projects, dredging channels and building dikes to control the raging torrents and make the land habitable once again. Chinese flood mythology goes even deeper, with the goddess Nuwa credited with repairing the broken pillars of heaven that had caused both cosmic fire and flood to devastate the earth. Using colored stones to patch the holes in the sky and the legs of a giant turtle to prop up the sagging corners of heaven, Nuwa restored cosmic order and ended the age of catastrophic flooding that threatened to destroy all life. What are we to make of this remarkable consistency across cultures separated by vast distances, different languages, and thousands of years of independent development? The sheer ubiquity of the flood narrative suggests something more than mere coincidence or independent invention. Some scholars propose that these stories arise naturally from the universal human experience of living near rivers and coastlines, where periodic flooding poses a constant threat to survival and prosperity. In this psychological interpretation, the universal flood story represents an archetypal response to humanity's shared vulnerability to water's destructive power. Yet this explanation seems insufficient to account for the specific details that recur across different flood traditions. The repeated motifs of divine warning, the construction of vessels, the gathering of animals, the sending forth of birds, and the landing on mountain peaks suggest either cultural diffusion from a common source or the preservation of memories related to actual historical events. The remarkable consistency of these narrative elements across cultures that had no known contact challenges us to consider whether these stories might preserve distorted but genuine historical memories. Recent archaeological and geological research has revealed that human history coincided with periods of dramatic climate change and catastrophic flooding that could indeed have left lasting impressions on cultural memory. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, witnessed unprecedented environmental upheavals as massive ice sheets melted and released their waters into the world's oceans. Sea levels rose by more than 120 meters, drowning vast continental shelves where early human populations may have established some of their first permanent settlements. These rising waters would have been particularly devastating to coastal populations who may have developed more complex societies in the fertile river deltas and broad coastal plains that are now submerged beneath dozens of meters of seawater. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the world's earliest agricultural communities emerged in these now drowned landscapes, and their destruction by rising seas could indeed have generated the kind of traumatic cultural memories that would be preserved in flood mythology. The flood myths often describe the antediluvian world as fundamentally different from our own, possessed of knowledge, technologies, or spiritual powers that were lost in the Great Catastrophe. Mesopotamian king lists describe rulers of the pre-flood world who reigned for tens of thousands of years, suggesting either symbolic or actual differences between antediluvian and post-diluvian humanity. The biblical account speaks of people living for many centuries and describes the mysterious Nephilim, giants who were the offspring of divine beings and human women. Hindu traditions preserve perhaps the most elaborate descriptions of antediluvian civilizations, describing advanced societies with flying vehicles called vimanas, powerful weapons that could level entire cities, and sophisticated technologies that allowed communication across vast distances. The Mahabharata and other ancient Indian texts speak of these lost civilizations in terms that sometimes seem to anticipate modern technology, describing weapons that could destroy armies with brilliant light and heat, vehicles that could travel through air and space, and cities that floated above the earth. These descriptions of lost antediluvian knowledge have captured human imagination for millennia, inspiring countless theories about vanished civilizations that may have achieved levels of advancement equal to or exceeding our own. While mainstream archaeology has found no evidence for high-technology civilizations in the deep past, the persistence of these traditions across multiple cultures suggests that they preserve some kind of historical memory, even if that memory has been transformed and elaborated over thousands of years of oral transmission. As we begin our exploration of these ancient mysteries, we find ourselves standing at the fascinating intersection of mythology and history, between the stories humanity tells about its past and the evidence we can gather through scientific investigation. The Great Flood narratives may represent our species' oldest form of historical consciousness, preserving in symbolic and poetic language the echoes of real events that shaped human development in ways we are only beginning to understand through modern archaeology and geology. The universality of flood stories speaks to something profound in our shared human experience, something that transcends individual cultures and touches the deepest levels of our collective memory. Whether these tales preserve literal recollections of catastrophic events or represent more abstract truths about destruction, survival, and renewal, they continue to resonate across cultures and centuries with undiminished power. They give voice to our deepest anxieties about the fragility of civilization and our most enduring faith in humanity's capacity to survive and rebuild even in the face of overwhelming catastrophe. As we prepare to delve deeper into these ancient narratives and the archaeological evidence that may support or challenge them, we must approach them with both scientific rigor and imaginative openness. The stories our ancestors preserved about the Great Flood and the lost world that preceded it may hold keys to understanding not only where we came from, but who we are as a species and what we might yet become. In seeking to understand the antediluvian world, we embark on a journey that is simultaneously archaeological and psychological, historical and mythological, scientific and deeply, fundamentally human. In the opening chapters of Genesis, we glimpse a world so alien to our modern experience that it reads almost like science fiction. Here, humans lived for nearly a millennium, walking and talking with God in the cool of evening breezes. Giants strode across the landscape, born from the union of divine beings and mortal women. Knowledge flowed directly from heaven to earth, and the very fabric of reality operated under different physical and spiritual laws than those we know today. The genealogies of Genesis paint a portrait of extraordinary longevity that defies contemporary understanding of human biology. Adam, the first man, lived for 930 years before returning to the dust from which he was formed. His son Seth reached 912 years, while Seth's son Enosh lived 905 years. The pattern continues through the antediluvian generations, with most patriarchs surviving well beyond 8 centuries, their lifespans stretching across multiple generations of their descendants. Perhaps most remarkable of all was Methuselah, whose name has become synonymous with extreme old age. According to the biblical record, this descendant of Seth lived for 969 years, making him the longest-lived human being in recorded history. His grandfather Jared reached 962 years, while his great-great-grandfather Mahalalel lived 895 years. These figures represent lifespans roughly 10 times longer than what we consider normal human longevity today. The implications of such extended lifespans for antediluvian civilization would have been profound. Imagine the accumulation of knowledge and skill possible when individuals could spend centuries perfecting their crafts, observing natural phenomena, and passing wisdom directly to dozens of generations of descendants. A single person could witness the rise and fall of entire cultural movements, the slow changes in climate and landscape, the gradual development of technologies and arts across spans of time that encompass our entire recorded history. According to Genesis, these long-lived patriarchs were not merely passive observers, but active builders of civilization. Cain, Adam's firstborn son, is credited with founding the first city, which he named after his son, Enoch. The text suggests that urbanization began almost immediately after humanity's expulsion from Eden, implying a rapid development of complex social organization and architectural knowledge that allowed for permanent settlements and specialized labor. The descendants of Cain became the progenitors of various arts and industries that would define human civilization. Jabal is described as the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock, essentially founding the nomadic pastoral lifestyle that would sustain many cultures for millennia. His brother Jubal became the father of all who play the harp and pipe, suggesting that musical instruments and artistic expression emerged very early in human development. Their half-brother Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, indicating that metallurgy and tool-making reached sophisticated levels in the antediluvian world. Yet the biblical narrative suggests that this rapid technological and cultural development came at a spiritual cost. As humanity multiplied and spread across the earth, the text indicates that they began to drift away from their direct relationship with the divine. The line between the sacred and profane became increasingly blurred, culminating in the mysterious account of the sons of God taking wives from among the daughters of men. This cryptic passage in Genesis chapter 6 has generated more theological speculation and debate than perhaps any other brief section of Scripture. Who were these sons of God, and what exactly transpired when they intermingled with human women? Traditional Jewish and early Christian interpretation identified the sons of God as angels or other divine beings who abandoned their proper celestial realm to engage in forbidden relationships with mortal women. The offspring of these unions were called the Nephilim, a Hebrew word that carries connotations of fallen ones or mighty men. The text describes them as giants who became the heroes of old, men of renown whose exploits echoed through subsequent generations. These beings appear to have possessed capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations, perhaps inheriting supernatural strength, knowledge, or longevity from their divine parentage. The Book of Enoch, though not included in the biblical canon, provides elaborate details about these fallen angels and their impact on antediluvian civilization. According to this ancient text, 200 watchers descended from heaven under the leadership of Semyaza and settled on Mount Hermon. They took human wives and taught humanity various forbidden arts and sciences that were meant to remain hidden until appointed times. Enoch describes how these fallen angels instructed humans in metallurgy, cosmetics, astronomy, weather manipulation, and the arts of war. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor, while also showing women how to beautify themselves with makeup and jewelry. Barakel taught astrology, Kokabel showed the constellations, Ezekiel revealed knowledge of the clouds, Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, Shamsiel revealed the signs of the sun, and Sariel taught about the moon's phases. This influx of premature divine knowledge, according to Enochian tradition, corrupted human civilization and led to widespread violence, environmental destruction, and spiritual rebellion against the natural order. The giants born from these unions became tyrants who oppressed ordinary humans and consumed the Earth's resources at an unsustainable rate. They eventually turned to cannibalism, devouring not only animals but human beings as well, creating a world of terror and chaos that cried out for divine intervention. The biblical account suggests that this corruption extended beyond mere moral failing to encompass the very essence of human nature. Genesis states that God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This describes not occasional wrongdoing but a fundamental corruption of human consciousness itself, as if the divine image in which humanity was originally created had become systematically distorted. The antediluvian world, according to biblical tradition, was also characterized by unprecedented violence. The Hebrew word Hamas, used to describe the violence that filled the earth before the flood, carries connotations of ruthless brutality and systemic oppression that goes beyond individual acts of aggression to encompass entire social structures built on exploitation and cruelty. This suggests that antediluvian civilization, despite its technological achievements and divine knowledge, had created systems of organized violence that made peaceful coexistence impossible. Yet not all of antediluvian humanity fell into this pattern of corruption and violence. The biblical narrative preserves the line of Seth as maintaining faithfulness to God across the centuries before the flood. This genealogy includes remarkable figures like Enoch, who walked with God for 300 years after the birth of his son Methuselah, and then was taken directly into heaven without experiencing death, suggesting that divine fellowship remained possible even in an increasingly corrupt world. The antediluvian world described in Genesis was also characterized by direct divine communication in ways that later became increasingly rare. God spoke directly with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the text suggests that this direct relationship continued, though perhaps in diminished form, through the early generations. The patriarchs appear to have had access to divine revelation and guidance that allowed them to maintain their extraordinarily long lifespans and accumulate wisdom across centuries of experience. Some interpreters have suggested that the antediluvian world operated under different physical laws than our current creation. The absence of rain before the flood, with the earth watered instead by mist and springs, implies a different atmospheric and hydrological system. The extraordinary human longevity might have resulted from optimal environmental conditions, superior genetics undiluted by centuries of accumulated mutations, or perhaps a fundamentally different relationship between spirit and matter that allowed for greater physical vitality and healing. The concept of the antediluvian world as described in Genesis profoundly influenced Western imagination and culture for centuries. Medieval chroniclers attempted to reconstruct antediluvian history, creating elaborate genealogies and timelines that traced human development from Adam through the flood. Renaissance scholars debated whether the extraordinary achievements attributed to figures like Enoch and the sons of Cain could account for later technological developments that seemed to exceed what primitive societies should have been able to accomplish. During the Age of Exploration, European travelers often interpreted the advanced civilizations they encountered in the Americas, Asia, and other regions as possible remnants or echoes of antediluvian knowledge. The sophisticated astronomical observations of Maya and Aztec priests, the metallurgical expertise of Andean civilizations, and the architectural achievements of various ancient cultures were sometimes attributed to traditions preserved from before the flood, passed down through the descendants of Noah who had scattered across the earth after the Tower of Babel. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries saw renewed fascination with the idea of a lost golden age before the flood, when humanity possessed capabilities and knowledge that had been subsequently forgotten. Poets and novelists drew inspiration from the idea of antediluvian giants and the mysterious sons of God, creating works that blended biblical themes with emerging archaeological discoveries and geological theories about deep time and ancient catastrophes. Modern biblical scholarship has approached the antediluvian narratives from various perspectives, some viewing them as mythological constructs designed to explain the origins of evil and suffering, others as symbolic representations of humanity's spiritual development, and still others as potentially preserving historical memories of actual events and peoples from the deep past. Archaeological discoveries of megalithic structures, sophisticated ancient technologies, and evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations have kept alive the possibility that the biblical accounts might preserve kernels of historical truth about human capabilities before recorded history began. The figure of Enoch holds particular fascination in this regard, as he represents the antediluvian figure most directly associated with divine revelation and hidden knowledge. According to various traditions, Enoch was granted visions of heaven and earth, past and future, and was instructed to record this knowledge for the benefit of future generations. The books of Enoch, though considered apocryphal by most Christian denominations, preserve elaborate descriptions of cosmic geography, angelic hierarchies, and prophetic visions that allegedly originated with this mysterious antediluvian patriarch. These Enochian traditions describe a complex universe populated by various orders of angels and spiritual beings, governed by precise laws and cycles that determine the movements of celestial bodies, the changing of seasons, and the unfolding of historical events. Enoch is portrayed as receiving detailed instruction in astronomy, mathematics, calendar systems, and natural philosophy directly from archangels who served as his guides through the heavenly realms. The impact of biblical antediluvian traditions on Western esoteric and occult movements cannot be overstated, from medieval alchemists who claim to possess secrets preserved from before the flood, to Renaissance magicians who invoked the names of antediluvian angels and patriarchs, to modern New Age movements that blend biblical imagery with contemporary spiritual practices. The idea of lost antediluvian wisdom continues to capture human imagination and inspire searches for hidden knowledge. Even in secular contexts, the biblical vision of an antediluvian golden age has influenced scientific and philosophical speculation about human potential and prehistoric achievements. Some researchers have proposed that modern civilization represents not the pinnacle of human development, but rather a recovery of capabilities that were once more widespread in ancient times. This perspective suggests that legends of lost technologies, advanced ancient civilizations, and superhuman achievements might preserve memories of a time when human beings operated at higher levels of consciousness or had access to knowledge that has since been forgotten or suppressed. As we prepare to examine the Mesopotamian precursors to these biblical traditions, we carry with us this vision of an antediluvian world where the boundaries between heaven and earth, divine and human, natural and supernatural, were far more permeable than in our present experience. Whether understood as literal history, symbolic truth, or mythological construct, the biblical account of the antediluvian world continues to challenge our assumptions about human nature, technological progress, and the relationship between spiritual development and material civilization. It reminds us that the story of humanity may be far stranger and more complex than our modern scientific worldview typically acknowledges, and that the deepest questions about our origins and destiny may require us to consider possibilities that extend beyond the conventional boundaries of historical and archaeological investigation. In the dusty archives beneath the ancient mounds of Mesopotamia, archaeologists have uncovered clay tablets that fundamentally changed our understanding of human civilization and its earliest written memories. These cuneiform inscriptions, pressed into clay by scribes working 4 millennia ago, preserve not only the world's first great literary epic, but also what may be humanity's oldest recorded account of a global catastrophe that reset the course of history. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from the libraries of Assyrian kings, particularly from the great collection assembled by Ashurbanipal in his palace at Nineveh during the 7th century before the Common Era. Yet the stories contained within these tablets reach back much further into the mists of Mesopotamian memory, to the earliest days of Sumerian civilization, when the art of writing was still young and the boundary between history and myth had not yet been clearly drawn. Gilgamesh himself appears to have been a real historical figure, a king of Uruk who ruled sometime around 2700 years before the Common Era. The Sumerian king list, one of the most important chronological documents to survive from the ancient Near East, records him as the 5th ruler of Uruk's first dynasty, reigning for 126 years. Archaeological evidence from Uruk confirms the existence of massive building projects and fortification walls that could correspond to the legendary achievements attributed to this semi-mythical monarch. But the Gilgamesh who emerges from the epic poetry is far more than a historical king. He is portrayed as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, possessing supernatural strength and beauty that made him both beloved and feared by his subjects. The epic describes him as standing 11 cubits tall, with a body like a wild bull and a gaze like that of a distant land. His hair was matted like that of Samukan, the god of cattle, and his beauty was such that no woman could resist him, whether she was the daughter of a warrior or the wife of a nobleman. The city of Uruk itself, as described in the epic, was a marvel of antediluvian engineering and architecture. The text speaks of its great walls, built with baked bricks and bitumen, encompassing an area of 9 square miles. Within these walls stood magnificent temples, broad streets, and gardens that demonstrated the advanced urban planning capabilities of early Mesopotamian civilization. The epic suggests that Uruk represented the pinnacle of human achievement in the post-flood world, yet it was built upon the foundations of even more ancient knowledge and techniques. Central to understanding Mesopotamian concepts of antediluvian civilization is the figure of Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who becomes Gilgamesh's instructor in the deepest mysteries of human existence. Unlike the biblical Noah, Utnapishtim is portrayed not merely as a righteous man chosen for preservation, but as someone who possessed intimate knowledge of the divine counsels and cosmic forces that governed the ancient world. When Gilgamesh seeks him out in his quest for immortality, Utnapishtim dwells at the mouth of the rivers, in a realm that exists outside normal time and space. He has been granted eternal life as a reward for his role in preserving civilization through the Great Catastrophe, making him a living bridge between the antediluvian world and the current age. His very existence proves that death is not inevitable for mortals, though achieving such transcendence requires divine intervention or the possession of extraordinary wisdom. Utnapishtim's account of the flood reveals details about antediluvian Mesopotamian society that are absent from biblical traditions. He describes a world where humans lived in such close proximity to the gods that their daily activities disturbed the divine realms. The constant noise of human civilization had grown so loud that it prevented the god Enlil from sleeping, prompting him to propose the destruction of humanity as a solution to this cosmic insomnia. This detail suggests that the antediluvian world had achieved a level of population density and technological activity that generated unprecedented amounts of sound and disturbance. The implication is that pre-flood civilization had developed industries, transportation systems, and urban centers that created a level of acoustic pollution comparable to what we associate with modern industrial societies. Such a scenario would require sophisticated metallurgy, mechanical engineering, and large-scale coordinated labor that exceeds what we typically imagine for early human societies. The Mesopotamian account also reveals complex divine politics that influenced the decision to destroy the world. While Enlil advocated for complete annihilation, other deities harbored different opinions about humanity's fate. Ea, the god of wisdom and water, chose to warn Utnapishtim through clever wordplay, speaking to the walls of his house rather than directly to him to avoid technically violating the divine decree of secrecy. This divine disagreement implies that the gods themselves were divided about the wisdom and justice of destroying antediluvian civilization. Some deities apparently valued what humanity had achieved and were reluctant to see it completely obliterated. This suggests that the pre-flood world had developed arts, sciences, and cultural achievements that even impressed the divine realm, making its destruction a matter of cosmic debate rather than unanimous divine judgment. The Sumerian king list provides additional insight into Mesopotamian concepts of antediluvian civilization through its systematic recording of rulers who reigned before the flood. These antediluvian kings are credited with reigns of extraordinary duration that dwarf even the extended lifespans recorded in biblical genealogies. Alulim, the first king who ruled at Eridu, allegedly reigned for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalngar, ruled for 36,000 years. The city of Bad Tibira saw rulers with even longer reigns. Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years, while his successor Enmengalana reigned for 28,800 years. The divine shepherd Dumuzid ruled for 36,000 years before ascending to become a god himself. These figures suggest that Mesopotamian traditions preserved memories of an antediluvian age when time itself operated differently, allowing for the accumulation of knowledge and experience across spans that encompass entire geological epochs by modern standards. Archaeological excavations across Mesopotamia have uncovered physical evidence that corresponds to some elements of these ancient flood traditions. At numerous sites throughout the region, including Ur, Uruk, Shuruppak, and Kish, archaeologists have discovered distinct layers of water-deposited sediment that interrupt the normal sequence of cultural deposits. These flood layers, dating to various periods in the 4th and 3rd millennia before the Common Era, provide concrete evidence of significant flooding events that disrupted urban centers and may have contributed to the development of flood mythology. The most famous of these discoveries was made by Leonard Woolley during his excavations at Ur in the 1920s and 30s. Digging through the Royal Cemetery, Woolley's team encountered a layer of clean clay 8 feet thick that contained no artifacts or cultural material. Below this sterile deposit, they found evidence of earlier Sumerian occupation, suggesting that a major flood had indeed separated 2 distinct phases of civilization at this important ancient city. Similar flood deposits have been found at other Mesopotamian sites, though they do not all date to the same period, suggesting that the region experienced multiple catastrophic flooding events rather than a single, universal deluge. These archaeological findings support the idea that Mesopotamian flood traditions may preserve genuine historical memories of devastating floods that disrupted early urban civilizations and became incorporated into epic literature and religious mythology. The technology described in Mesopotamian flood accounts also provides clues about antediluvian civilizations' achievements. Utnapishtim's vessel, as described in various versions of the epic, was a massive cube-shaped boat coated with bitumen and divided into multiple compartments. The precision of its measurements and the sophistication of its waterproofing techniques suggest advanced knowledge of naval architecture and materials science that enabled the construction of vessels capable of surviving catastrophic flooding. The use of bitumen as a waterproofing agent is particularly significant, as this petroleum-based substance requires specific extraction and processing techniques to be effective for marine applications. The availability and skilled use of bitumen in antediluvian times suggests that Mesopotamian civilization had developed sophisticated chemical knowledge and industrial processes for exploiting natural resources on a considerable scale. Mesopotamian traditions also preserve accounts of antediluvian sages known as the Apkallu, 7 wise beings who emerged from the sea before the flood to teach humanity the arts of civilization. These figures were described as having the bodies of fish but the heads and feet of men, combining aquatic and terrestrial characteristics in ways that suggest they may have represented memories of cultural contact with maritime peoples who possessed advanced knowledge. The first and greatest of these Apkallu was Adapa, who was granted great wisdom by the god Ea, but tricked into refusing the bread and water of eternal life. Despite missing the opportunity for immortality, Adapa became the prototype of human wisdom and the founder of the priestly arts. He established the proper forms of ritual worship, taught the correct methods of sacrifice, and instructed humanity in the reading of omens and the interpretation of divine signs. The other Apkallu continued this pattern of divine instruction, teaching humanity architecture, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and the various crafts necessary for civilized life. Their teachings allegedly formed the foundation of all subsequent Mesopotamian knowledge, suggesting that post-flood civilization was essentially attempting to recover and reconstruct the wisdom that had been preserved from antediluvian times through these semi-divine instructors. Mesopotamian astronomical texts also contain references to observations and calculations that supposedly originated in antediluvian times. The sophisticated mathematical astronomy of later Babylonian civilization, with its precise predictions of planetary movements and eclipse cycles, was attributed by scribes to wisdom preserved from before the flood. This suggests that antediluvian Mesopotamian civilization may have achieved remarkable levels of mathematical and observational sophistication in tracking celestial phenomena. The Mesopotamian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, provides additional context for understanding how antediluvian civilization fit into cosmic history. According to this text, the current world order emerged from a primordial conflict between older and younger generations of gods, with humanity created specifically to serve divine needs and maintain cosmic stability. The flood, in this context, represents a cosmic reset that allowed for the establishment of a new and more stable relationship between divine and human realms. This cosmological framework suggests that Mesopotamian culture understood the antediluvian world as an experimental phase in human development, a time when the proper boundaries between mortal and divine were still being established. The destruction of that world through flood was not simply punishment for human wickedness, but part of a larger cosmic process of refinement and development that ultimately led to the current age of more clearly defined roles and relationships. The influence of Mesopotamian flood traditions extended far beyond the boundaries of their original cultural context. As trade networks and cultural exchange spread throughout the ancient Near East, these stories traveled with merchants, diplomats, and refugees, becoming incorporated into the mythologies and religious traditions of other peoples. The similarities between the Gilgamesh flood account and biblical traditions clearly demonstrate this process of cultural transmission and adaptation. Yet the Mesopotamian versions retain distinctive elements that reflect their origins in a civilization deeply connected to river systems and irrigation agriculture. The emphasis on the noise of human civilization disturbing divine sleep, the detailed descriptions of boat construction and waterproofing, and the complex divine politics surrounding the flood decision all reflect specifically Mesopotamian concerns and experiences with managing water resources and dealing with periodic flooding disasters. Modern scholars have debated whether the Mesopotamian flood traditions represent purely mythological constructs or preserve genuine historical memories of catastrophic events. The archaeological evidence for significant flooding in ancient Mesopotamia supports the possibility that real disasters contributed to the development of these narratives, but the supernatural elements and impossibly long chronologies clearly indicate substantial mythological elaboration over centuries of oral and written transmission. As we prepare to explore how these Mesopotamian traditions spread and influenced flood narratives in other cultures around the world, we can appreciate the remarkable sophistication of the civilization that first committed these stories to writing. Whether or not the antediluvian world described in the Epic of Gilgamesh ever existed as portrayed, the epic itself demonstrates that by 4,000 years ago, Mesopotamian culture had developed literary, philosophical, and scientific capabilities that allowed them to grapple with the deepest questions about human existence, cosmic order, and the relationship between civilization and catastrophe. The legacy of these ancient Mesopotamian insights continues to influence how we think about lost civilizations, catastrophic change, and the fragility of human achievement. In preserving their memories of the antediluvian world, the scribes of Babylon and Assyria gave us not just entertainment or religious instruction, but a profound meditation on what it means to be human in a universe where even the greatest achievements of civilization remain vulnerable to forces beyond our control. Far from the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, in lands where different stars wheeled overhead and different gods held sway over human destiny, cultures that had never heard the name of Gilgamesh or walked the streets of ancient Uruk preserved their own intricate memories of worldwide catastrophe. These distant traditions reveal patterns of destruction and renewal that suggest either remarkable coincidence or the preservation of memories so ancient that they predate the separation of human populations across the globe. In the mountain kingdoms of Tibet, Buddhist monks preserved the Kanjur, an ancient collection of texts that includes the story of a great flood that once covered the highest peaks of the world. According to these traditions, a bodhisattva named Manjushri used his wisdom sword to cut through the mountains surrounding the Kathmandu Valley, allowing the primordial waters that had covered the earth to drain away and create habitable land for future generations. This flood was not seen as punishment, but as a necessary stage in cosmic evolution, with the waters representing the undifferentiated potential that preceded the emergence of distinct forms and beings. The Tibetan account describes the pre-flood world as populated by beings of immense spiritual power who could manipulate matter through concentrated meditation and lived in harmony with natural forces that modern humans can barely perceive. These advanced beings supposedly achieved their capabilities through thousands of lifetimes of spiritual practice, accumulating wisdom and merit across eons of existence. When the cosmic flood arrived, they used their supernatural abilities to preserve essential knowledge and spiritual teachings that would guide future civilizations toward enlightenment. In the sacred groves of ancient Celtic lands, Druids maintained oral traditions about the great waters that once drowned the world, preserving these memories through elaborate bardic songs and ritualistic reenactments. The Irish Labor Gabala Erin describes how Cessair, the granddaughter of Noah, led a group of women to Ireland before the biblical flood, seeking to escape the coming catastrophe by fleeing to the western edges of the world. Though their attempt failed and all perished except for one man named Fintan, who survived by transforming into various animals, the tradition suggests that different human populations attempted various survival strategies during the global deluge. Celtic flood mythology often emphasizes the role of sacred wells and springs as connections to the otherworld, places where the waters of the cosmic flood were believed to still flow beneath the surface of ordinary reality. The Celts understood these natural water sources as portals through which knowledge from the antediluvian world could still be accessed by those with appropriate spiritual training and ancestral connections. Among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, whose oral traditions may preserve humanity's oldest continuous cultural memories, the rainbow serpent features prominently in flood narratives that describe the formation of the continent's distinctive landscape. According to Dreamtime stories shared across multiple tribal groups, the rainbow serpent carved the great rivers and gorges of Australia during a period when massive waters covered the land, shaping the geography that would support future generations of humans and animals. These Australian traditions describe the pre-flood landscape as a featureless plain where ancestral beings moved freely between spiritual and physical realms, creating the natural features and establishing the sacred sites that would guide human life for tens of thousands of years. The floodwaters brought both destruction and creative transformation, with the rainbow serpent's movements during this period establishing the watercourses and seasonal patterns that continue to sustain life across the continent. The sophistication of Aboriginal astronomical knowledge, with its precise tracking of stellar movements and seasonal changes across millennia, suggests that their flood traditions may preserve memories of environmental changes that occurred during the last ice age, when rising sea levels dramatically altered Australia's coastlines and river systems. Some researchers have proposed that Aboriginal oral traditions may contain the world's oldest continuous historical memories, potentially preserving information about landscapes and climate conditions from more than 10,000 years ago. In the volcanic islands of Polynesia, navigator priests maintained complex oral genealogies that connected their ancestors to survivors of a great flood that destroyed earlier Pacific civilizations. These traditions describe advanced maritime cultures that possessed sophisticated knowledge of ocean currents, stellar navigation, and weather prediction, allowing them to travel vast distances across open water and establish settlements on remote islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean. Polynesian flood myths often feature the demigod Maui, who used his supernatural strength and cunning to fish entire islands up from the ocean floor after the great waters had submerged earlier lands. These stories suggest that Polynesian culture preserved memories of dramatic sea level changes that transformed the Pacific landscape, forcing populations to adapt their settlement patterns and maritime technologies to survive in an altered world. The precision of Polynesian navigation techniques, which allowed them to cross thousands of miles of open ocean using only observations of stars, currents, and wildlife patterns, implies the existence of sophisticated astronomical and geographical knowledge that may have originated in pre-flood civilizations. The consistency of navigational traditions across the widely scattered island groups of Polynesia suggests that this knowledge was systematically preserved and transmitted across many generations of ocean voyagers. In the dense rainforests of the Amazon basin, indigenous shamans maintained elaborate mythological cycles that described how the great floodwaters emerged from the underworld through the roots of the world tree, drowning the previous creation and forcing the spirits of animals and plants to seek refuge in the upper branches of cosmic vegetation. These traditions portray the flood not as a single catastrophic event, but as part of an ongoing cycle of destruction and renewal that periodically transforms the relationship between spiritual and material realms. Amazonian flood narratives often emphasize the role of plant medicines and shamanic knowledge in preserving essential wisdom across cosmic catastrophes. According to these traditions, certain master plants agreed to preserve the memories and teachings of antediluvian civilizations within their molecular structures, allowing future shamans to access this knowledge through ritualistic consumption of psychoactive preparations. This concept of botanical libraries suggests that indigenous American cultures developed sophisticated techniques for encoding and preserving cultural information in biological systems. The complexity of Amazonian ethnobotanical knowledge, with its detailed understanding of thousands of plant species and their various medicinal, spiritual, and practical applications, implies the existence of systematic research traditions that may have required centuries or millennia to develop. Some researchers have suggested that the depth and sophistication of this botanical knowledge could only have emerged from advanced pre-Columbian civilizations that possessed formal institutions for the study and preservation of natural sciences. Among the Bantu-speaking peoples of Central and Southern Africa, oral traditions preserved through praise singers and ritual specialists describe how the great waters once covered the earth, forcing humanity and animals to seek refuge on mountaintops and in sacred caves that served as arks during the cosmic deluge. These African flood narratives often emphasize the role of ancestral spirits in guiding survivors to safety and teaching them the skills necessary to rebuild civilization in the transformed world. African flood traditions frequently connect the cosmic catastrophe to disruptions in the relationship between humans and the animal kingdom, suggesting that the antediluvian world was characterized by more intimate communication and cooperation between different species. According to these narratives, the flood represented a cosmic divorce that separated humans from their animal allies, requiring the development of new forms of ritual and spiritual practice to maintain connections with the natural world. The sophistication of traditional African astronomical knowledge, including precise calendar systems and complex mathematical concepts embedded in religious and cultural practices, suggests that these societies preserved advanced scientific knowledge across many generations of oral transmission. The integration of astronomical observations with agricultural practices, seasonal ceremonies, and spiritual beliefs implies the existence of systematic knowledge traditions that may have originated in ancient African civilizations. In the steppes of Central Asia, nomadic peoples maintained epic traditions that described how the Great Flood emerged from the cosmic ocean that surrounds the world, rising to cover all lands except the highest mountain peaks where shamans and their animal allies took refuge during the catastrophe. These Central Asian narratives often feature magical horses that could fly through the air and swim beneath the waters, carrying their riders to safety across landscapes transformed by the cosmic deluge. Central Asian flood traditions emphasize the role of shamanic flight in accessing knowledge preserved from antediluvian times, with spiritual practitioners using techniques of consciousness expansion to journey to otherworldly realms where the wisdom of pre-flood civilizations remained accessible to properly trained individuals. These practices suggest that nomadic cultures developed sophisticated psychological and spiritual technologies for preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge across generations. The astronomical sophistication evident in Central Asian cultures, including their development of complex calendar systems and their contributions to mathematical and astronomical knowledge that influenced civilizations from China to the Islamic world, implies the existence of advanced educational and cultural institutions that may have preserved knowledge traditions dating back to very ancient times. Among the Sami people of northern Scandinavia, whose reindeer herding culture adapted to some of the world's harshest environments, oral traditions preserved through shamanic songs describe how the Great Flood emerged from the melting of cosmic ice that had previously held the world in frozen stasis. According to these Arctic narratives, the flood represented a transition from a static ice age to a dynamic world of seasonal change, requiring humans and animals to develop new survival strategies and spiritual practices. Sami flood traditions often emphasize the role of the Northern Lights as messages from antediluvian ancestors who survived the cosmic catastrophe by transforming into spiritual beings that continue to guide their descendants through the aurora borealis. These traditions suggest that Arctic peoples developed sophisticated techniques for interpreting natural phenomena as forms of communication with otherworldly realms. The precision of traditional Sami knowledge about Arctic ecology, including their detailed understanding of reindeer behavior, weather patterns, and seasonal changes, implies the existence of systematic observation and knowledge preservation traditions that may have developed over thousands of years of adaptation to northern environments. As these diverse traditions from around the world demonstrate, The memory of cosmic flood appears to have been preserved in virtually every corner of human civilization, often accompanied by sophisticated astronomical, botanical, or ecological knowledge that suggests the existence of advanced pre-flood cultures. While the specific details vary according to local environments and cultural priorities, the consistent patterns of destruction, preservation, and renewal suggest either remarkable cultural convergence or the survival of genuine historical memories from humanity's deep past. The global distribution of these flood narratives, combined with their often sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena and preservation techniques, challenges conventional assumptions about the capabilities of ancient and traditional cultures. Whether these traditions preserve literal memories of catastrophic events or represent profound spiritual and psychological insights into the nature of change and continuity in human experience, they continue to offer valuable perspectives on humanity's relationship with natural forces and cosmic processes that modern civilization is only beginning to understand. These worldwide flood traditions remind us that human culture has always grappled with questions of survival, adaptation, and the preservation of knowledge across catastrophic change. As we face our own environmental and technological challenges, the wisdom preserved in these ancient narratives may offer insights into strategies for maintaining human civilization and cultural continuity in the face of potentially transformative future changes. 20,000 years ago, the world our ancestors knew bore little resemblance to the planet we inhabit today. Vast sheets of ice, some towering more than 3,000 meters into the sky, stretched across continents like frozen seas of white silence. These glaciers held so much of Earth's water prisoner that the oceans themselves had retreated, exposing landmasses larger than modern countries and creating a geography that would seem utterly alien to contemporary eyes. The ice had been advancing and retreating in great cycles for millions of years, but this most recent glaciation had reached a crescendo of frozen majesty that transformed the northern hemisphere into a landscape of crystalline wilderness. Where vibrant cities like London, Berlin, and Chicago now bustle with human activity, nothing existed but endless expanses of ice that groaned and cracked under their own immense weight, slowly carving valleys and sculpting mountains with the patience of geological time. Along the edges of these continental ice sheets, small bands of humans had learned to survive in conditions that would challenge even our most advanced modern explorers. They had developed intimate knowledge of ice behavior, wind patterns, and the subtle signs that indicated where resources might be found in this harsh but magnificent world. Their very existence depended on understanding the rhythms of a frozen planet that operated according to laws utterly different from those governing our temperate modern environment. Then, beginning around 19,000 years ago, something fundamental shifted in Earth's climate system. The orbital cycles that had maintained the Ice Age began to favor warming, and the great ice sheets that had dominated the northern latitudes for tens of thousands of years started their inexorable retreat toward the polar regions. What followed was not a gentle transition, but a series of catastrophic transformations that reshaped continents and redefined the possibilities for human civilization. The melting began slowly at first, with subtle changes in seasonal patterns and the gradual recession of ice margins. But as the process accelerated, it unleashed forces of such magnitude that they beggar the imagination. Glacial lakes formed along the retreating ice fronts, some of them larger than modern seas, held back only by dams of ice and debris that were themselves slowly melting and weakening under the relentless pressure of accumulated water. When these natural dams failed, the results were cataclysmic. Walls of water hundreds of feet high roared across landscapes with the force of liquid mountains, moving faster than a galloping horse and carrying enough energy to carve new river channels through solid bedrock in a matter of hours. The channeled scablands of Washington state still bear the scars of these prehistoric floods, their bizarre topography a testament to water's power when unleashed at geological scales. Lake Bonneville, which once covered much of present-day Utah, burst through its natural barriers around 17,000 years ago, sending a torrent down the Snake River Valley that dwarfed any flood in recorded human history. The volume of water released in this single event exceeded the combined flow of all modern rivers on Earth, sustained for weeks as the massive lake drained itself across hundreds of miles of previously stable landscape. Even more dramatic was the repeated flooding caused by glacial Lake Missoula, which formed and emptied dozens of times as ice dams advanced and retreated in the valleys of Montana. Each time the lake filled, it grew to contain more water than modern Lakes Erie and Ontario combined. Each time the ice dam failed, the entire volume rushed westward in a matter of days, creating temporary waterfalls higher than Niagara and floods that stripped away hundreds of feet of soil and sediment. These catastrophic drainage events were occurring simultaneously across the northern hemisphere as dozens of glacial lakes reached critical thresholds and released their contents in geological instants. The combined effect was to pour unprecedented volumes of fresh water into the world's oceans at rates that overwhelmed the capacity of normal drainage systems to handle such flows gradually. But the truly transformative effects came from the slower, more persistent melting of the ice sheets themselves. As these continental glaciers retreated, they released water that had been locked away for millennia, causing global sea levels to rise at rates that would have been visible within individual human lifetimes. Coastlines that had remained stable for thousands of years began moving inland at speeds measured in meters per decade rather than the millimeters per year we associate with modern sea level change. The continental shelves that are now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water had been dry land during the Ice Age, supporting vast ecosystems of plants and animals adapted to the cooler, drier conditions of the glacial world. As the meltwater from retreating ice sheets poured into the ocean basins, these extensive land masses disappeared beneath the rising waters, taking with them any human settlements, cultural sites, or evidence of civilization that might have developed in these now drowned territories. Between Asia and North America, the Bering Land Bridge slowly vanished beneath the Chukchi Sea, severing the connection between continents that had allowed the free movement of people, animals, and plants for tens of thousands of years. The vast plain of Beringia, with its unique cold-adapted ecosystems, became the shallow seafloor of the modern Bering Strait, leaving only the highest peaks as scattered islands in a transformed seascape. Around the British Isles, the submergence of Doggerland created the English Channel and North Sea, transforming Britain from a peninsula of continental Europe into an isolated archipelago. This drowned landscape had supported forests of birch and pine, herds of reindeer and elk, and quite possibly substantial human populations who exploited the rich resources of rivers, wetlands, and coastal environments that are now completely underwater. Similar transformations occurred around every continent as the rising seas claimed millions of square kilometers of previously habitable land. The Sunda Shelf between Southeast Asia and Australia, the Patagonian Shelf off South America, the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, and countless other areas that had been dry land during the Ice Age disappeared beneath waters that rose relentlessly for thousands of years. The speed of these changes varied dramatically depending on local conditions and the dynamics of ice sheet collapse in different regions. Some areas experienced relatively gradual sea level rise that allowed human and animal populations time to migrate inland as their coastal territories were submerged. Other regions witnessed catastrophic flooding events when ice dams failed or ice sheets collapsed, sending massive volumes of water racing across low-lying areas faster than fleeing populations could retreat to higher ground. The channeled Scablands floods, despite their awesome power, lasted only a few weeks or months and affected relatively limited geographic areas. But the melting of ice sheets like the one that covered Hudson Bay released water continuously for centuries, creating persistent flooding conditions that would have made large areas uninhabitable for generations at a time. Around 13,000 years ago, the drainage of glacial Lake Agassiz into Hudson Bay and the North Atlantic may have disrupted ocean circulation patterns so severely that it triggered the Younger Dryas cooling period, temporarily halting the warming trend and creating a 1,000-year return to near-glacial conditions. This climate reversal would have been catastrophic for human populations that had begun adapting to warmer conditions, forcing them to readjust to renewed Ice Age environments just as they were beginning to develop more settled lifestyles. The end of the Younger Dryas period, around 11,700 years ago, marked the final transition to our current interglacial climate. But this warming occurred so rapidly that ice cores showed temperature increases of 10 degrees Celsius in some regions within just a few decades. Such dramatic climate shifts would have created environmental chaos as ecosystems struggled to adapt to completely new temperature and precipitation patterns. The plant and animal communities that had characterized the Ice Age world began disappearing as forests replaced grasslands, wetlands dried up or were transformed into different types of aquatic ecosystems, and the specialized fauna adapted to cold conditions either migrated to higher latitudes or became extinct. The great herds of mammoth, mastodon, and other megafauna that had sustained human populations throughout the Ice Age vanished within a few thousand years, forcing dramatic changes in hunting strategies and resource utilization. For human populations experiencing these transformations, the world would have seemed to be ending and beginning simultaneously. Familiar landscapes disappeared beneath rising waters or were transformed beyond recognition by changing vegetation patterns. Traditional food sources became extinct or migrated to regions that were no longer accessible. Seasonal patterns that had governed human activities for thousands of years shifted dramatically, requiring completely new approaches to survival and adaptation. The archaeological record from this period shows evidence of significant cultural transitions as human societies struggled to adapt to the rapidly changing post-glacial world. New tool technologies appeared as traditional raw materials became unavailable and different hunting strategies were required for the changing animal communities. Settlement patterns shifted as rising sea levels forced populations away from traditional coastal areas, and changing resource distributions required new mobility patterns. The development of agriculture in multiple regions around the world shortly after the end of the Ice Age may represent humanity's most successful adaptation to the environmental instability of the post-glacial period. By learning to control the growth and reproduction of plants and animals, human societies could create more predictable food sources that were less vulnerable to the dramatic environmental fluctuations that characterized the early Holocene period. Yet the speed and scale of environmental change during deglaciation also created opportunities for cultural innovation and technological advancement. Populations forced to adapt rapidly to new conditions had strong incentives to develop more sophisticated tools, more flexible social organizations, and more effective strategies for information sharing and resource management. The genetic evidence preserved in modern human populations shows clear signatures of the demographic upheavals that occurred during the late Pleistocene period. Population bottlenecks, founder effects, and patterns of genetic diversity all point to periods of severe demographic stress that coincide with the major climate changes associated with deglaciation. These genetic patterns suggest that many human populations came very close to extinction during the environmental chaos of the Ice Age's end, surviving only through remarkable adaptability and perhaps some degree of luck in avoiding the most catastrophic local impacts of flooding, climate change, and ecosystem collapse. The survivors of these upheavals would have carried with them vivid memories of landscapes transformed, of waters that rose to cover familiar territories, of environmental changes so rapid and dramatic that they seemed supernatural in their scope and power. These memories, passed down through oral traditions and eventually incorporated into the mythological systems of later civilizations, may provide the historical foundation for the flood narratives that appear in cultures around the world. The end of the Ice Age offers a scientifically documented period of global environmental catastrophe that could indeed have generated the kind of traumatic cultural memories preserved in flood mythology. The scale, speed, and worldwide scope of deglaciation match the characteristics described in ancient flood narratives, while the archaeological evidence for human populations living in areas that were subsequently drowned provides a plausible mechanism for the widespread distribution of flood memories across different cultures and continents. In the crystal-clear waters off the coast of western India, where the Arabian Sea meets the ancient shores of Gujarat, scuba divers have discovered something that challenges our understanding of human civilization's timeline. Resting beneath 40 feet of seawater, covered by centuries of marine growth and sediment, lie the remains of what appears to be a substantial urban settlement. Stone structures, defensive walls, and evidence of organized construction stretch across the ocean floor, silent testimony to a world that existed when the sea level was much lower than it stands today. This underwater archaeological site, known as the submerged city of Dwarka, has yielded artifacts that suggest sophisticated urban planning and advanced construction techniques. Marine archaeologists have documented massive stone blocks fitted together with precision joinery, drainage systems that once channeled water through organized street layouts, and harbors designed to accommodate substantial maritime traffic. The pottery fragments and architectural elements recovered from these depths display craftsmanship that speaks to the existence of specialized artisans and complex social organization. The dating of organic materials found associated with these structures suggests that this settlement was thriving when sea levels were significantly lower than they are today, possibly as much as 9,000 years ago. If these dates prove accurate, they would place the construction of Dwarka's underwater ruins in the early Holocene period, making them contemporary with some of the world's earliest known urban centers, but in a location that conventional archaeology had not previously recognized as suitable for complex civilization. The discovery of Dwarka is part of a growing body of underwater archaeological evidence that is forcing scholars to reconsider the distribution and sophistication of early human settlements. As rising sea levels claimed the continental shelves that had supported human populations during the Ice Age, they preserved beneath the waves an archaeological record that may contain evidence of civilizations more advanced than we have previously recognized. Off the southern coast of Japan, in the crystal waters surrounding the Ryukyu Islands, lies perhaps the most controversial underwater archaeological site in the world. The Yonaguni Monument, discovered in the 1980s by diving instructor Kihachiro Aratake, presents visitors with a landscape that seems to defy natural explanation. Massive stepped terraces carved from solid bedrock rise from the ocean floor like the foundations of an enormous temple or ceremonial complex. The monument's most striking features include perfectly straight edges, right-angle corners, and geometric shapes that bear remarkable similarity to human architectural forms. Parallel channels run across the structure's surface, connecting circular holes that appear to have been deliberately carved into the rock. Stone pathways wind between different levels of the terraced formation, while what appear to be stairs and platforms suggest that this was once a place designed for human use and occupation. Geologists remain divided about whether the Yonaguni Monument represents natural rock formations or human construction. The sandstone from which it is carved can fracture along straight lines under certain geological conditions, potentially creating features that mimic artificial construction. However, the complexity and apparent coordination of the monument's various elements have convinced some researchers that at least some modification by human hands must have occurred. If the Yonaguni Monument does represent human construction, its current depth beneath the sea suggests that it was built when ocean levels were much lower than today. The monument rests at depths that would place its construction during the final phases of the Ice Age, when this area would have been dry land accessible to human populations. Such a dating would make it one of the oldest large-scale architectural projects known to archaeology, predating Stonehenge by thousands of years. The monument's apparent astronomical alignments have added another layer of intrigue to its mysterious origins. Some researchers have noted that its orientation corresponds to significant celestial events, suggesting that it may have served as an ancient observatory or ceremonial center aligned with solar and lunar cycles. If these alignments are intentional rather than coincidental, they would indicate sophisticated astronomical knowledge among the monument's builders. In the North Sea, between Britain and the Netherlands, marine surveys have revealed the ghostly outlines of an entire drowned landscape known as Doggerland. This vast plain, which connected the British Isles to continental Europe during the Ice Age, supported extensive forests, river systems, and quite possibly substantial human populations before being gradually submerged by rising seas. Recent sonar mapping and core sampling in the Doggerland region have uncovered evidence of ancient riverbeds, lake systems, and what appear to be artificial modifications to natural features. Peat deposits preserved beneath marine sediments contain pollen records that reveal the plant communities that once flourished in this drowned world, while occasional artifacts recovered by fishing trawls hint at the human presence that once inhabited these now submerged territories. The scale of Doggerland's submergence represents one of the most dramatic landscape transformations in recent geological history. This region, which may have supported human populations comparable to those found elsewhere in Mesolithic Europe, disappeared beneath the waves over a period of several thousand years as melting ice sheets released their waters into the world's oceans. The loss of this extensive landmass would have displaced substantial numbers of people and potentially destroyed archaeological evidence of significant cultural developments. Archaeological investigations in Doggerland face unique challenges due to the depth of water, strong currents, and thick accumulations of marine sediment that have covered the original land surface. However, advances in underwater survey technology and deep-sea excavation techniques are beginning to yield tantalizing glimpses of the human societies that once flourished in this drowned world. Recent discoveries include worked flint tools, bone artifacts, and evidence of controlled burning that suggests sophisticated land management practices among Doggerland's inhabitants. The distribution of these finds across the former landscape indicates that human occupation was widespread and intensive, supporting the idea that this region may have been one of Europe's most important centers of Mesolithic culture. In the Mediterranean Sea, underwater archaeologists have documented numerous submerged settlements that reveal the sophisticated maritime adaptations of ancient coastal peoples. Off the coast of Israel, the submerged Neolithic site of Atlit Yam has yielded remarkably well-preserved evidence of an advanced fishing and farming community that flourished around 9,000 years ago. The site includes stone-built water wells lined with carefully fitted stones, storage facilities for grain and other agricultural products, and evidence of sophisticated boat-building techniques that allowed the inhabitants to exploit both marine and terrestrial resources. The preservation of organic materials in the anaerobic environment of the seabed has provided unprecedented insights into the daily lives of these ancient coastal dwellers. Most remarkably, Atlit Yam has preserved what appears to be one of the world's oldest known stone circles, a mysterious arrangement of megalithic stones that was clearly constructed for ceremonial or astronomical purposes. The circle's submergence beneath several meters of seawater has protected it from the vandalism and natural weathering that have damaged many terrestrial stone circles, allowing researchers to study an intact example of this ancient architectural form. The site's inhabitants appear to have abandoned their settlement suddenly, leaving behind tools, pottery, and other artifacts that suggest rapid departure rather than gradual abandonment. Some researchers have proposed that the community may have fled in response to rising sea levels or catastrophic flooding that threatened their coastal location. In the waters surrounding Malta, marine archaeologists have identified underwater temples and megalithic structures that may represent extensions of the island's famous terrestrial temple complexes. These submerged monuments, if they prove to be artificial constructions, would demonstrate that Malta's ancient inhabitants possessed maritime engineering capabilities that allowed them to construct substantial stone buildings in coastal zones that are now underwater. The dating of these potential underwater temples remains controversial, but some estimates suggest they could be contemporary with or even older than Malta's terrestrial temples, which are among the world's oldest freestanding stone buildings. If confirmed, these discoveries would significantly expand our understanding of the scale and sophistication of Malta's prehistoric civilization. Along the coasts of the Americas, underwater archaeology has revealed evidence of sophisticated maritime adaptations among ancient Native American populations. In the Gulf of Mexico, submerged archaeological sites have yielded evidence of human occupation dating back over 10,000 years, when much of the present-day continental shelf was exposed as dry land. These sites have produced stone tools, hearths, and evidence of organized hunting camps that demonstrate the presence of substantial human populations in areas that are now far offshore. The preservation of organic materials in underwater contexts has allowed for precise radiocarbon dating that places human occupation of these areas during the terminal Pleistocene period, when dramatically different environmental conditions supported ecosystems unlike anything found in the region today. Off the coast of California, underwater surveys have identified what appear to be ancient shoreline features and possible human habitation sites at depths that correspond to Ice Age sea levels. These discoveries suggest that the Pacific coast of North America may have supported much larger human populations during the Ice Age than previously recognized, with substantial settlements located on coastal plains that are now submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean. The potential implications of these underwater discoveries extend far beyond simple additions to our catalog of archaeological sites. If the submerged settlements prove to represent sophisticated urban centers or ceremonial complexes, they could fundamentally alter our understanding of when and where complex human societies first emerged. The conventional narrative of human civilization suggests that urban centers, monumental architecture, and complex social organization developed relatively recently in human history, beginning with sites like Çatalhöyük in Turkey and the earliest Mesopotamian cities around 9,000 to 6,000 years ago. However, the underwater sites that are being discovered and investigated suggest that similar developments may have occurred much earlier in human history, in coastal locations that are now inaccessible to conventional archaeological investigation. The preservation conditions in underwater archaeological sites often exceed those found at terrestrial locations, particularly for organic materials that decay rapidly when exposed to air and fluctuating moisture conditions. The anaerobic environment of marine sediments can preserve wood, textiles, food remains, and other materials that rarely survive in terrestrial contexts, potentially providing unprecedented insights into the technologies and lifestyles of ancient coastal populations. However, underwater archaeology also faces unique challenges that limit the scale and scope of investigations possible at submerged sites. The expense and technical complexity of underwater excavation means that only a small fraction of known underwater archaeological sites have been systematically investigated, leaving vast areas of the drowned continental shelves unexplored and their archaeological potential unknown. The implications of widespread underwater archaeological sites for our understanding of antediluvian civilizations are profound. If substantial human settlements existed on the continental shelves during the Ice Age, their submergence beneath rising seas could account for the apparent gap between the sophisticated technologies and cultural achievements described in flood myths and the relatively simple archaeological record of most known Ice Age sites. The flood narratives preserved in cultures around the world often describe antediluvian civilizations as possessing advanced knowledge, sophisticated technologies, and impressive architectural achievements. While such descriptions are typically dismissed as mythological exaggerations, the discovery of complex underwater archaeological sites raises the possibility that these traditions may preserve memories of actual settlements and civilizations that were lost when rising seas claimed the coastal regions where they had developed. As underwater archaeological techniques continue to advance and more resources are devoted to investigating submerged sites, we may discover that the human story includes chapters of technological and cultural achievement that occurred much earlier than previously recognized in locations that are now accessible only to divers and submersibles exploring the mysterious world beneath the waves. In the 4th century before the Common Era, in the marble halls of ancient Athens where philosophy was still young and the boundaries between history and imagination had not yet been firmly established, an aging philosopher named Plato crafted a story that would captivate human imagination for over 2 millennia. Within the pages of his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he introduced the world to Atlantis, a magnificent island civilization that had supposedly flourished 9,000 years before his own time, only to vanish beneath the waves in a single day and night of catastrophic destruction. Plato's Atlantis was not merely a lost city but an entire alternate model of human civilization, a society that had achieved remarkable technological and cultural sophistication before ultimately falling victim to moral corruption and divine punishment. He described it as a circular island larger than Libya and Asia combined, surrounded by concentric rings of land and water that had been shaped by the god Poseidon himself as a paradise for his mortal lover Cleito and their descendants. The capital city of Atlantis, according to Plato's account, was a marvel of urban planning and engineering that exceeded even the most ambitious projects of classical Greek civilization. At its center stood a temple to Poseidon constructed of silver, gold, and the mysterious metal orichalcum, which Plato described as being more precious than any substance except gold itself. This temple housed a golden statue of the sea god driving 6 winged horses, so massive and magnificent that it touched the ceiling of the sacred building. The Atlanteans had carved an elaborate system of canals and harbors that allowed ships from across the known world to dock at their magnificent port facilities. 3 circular harbors surrounded the city, each protected by walls and connected by tunnels large enough for ships to pass through. The engineering required for such a project would have demanded mathematical knowledge, hydraulic expertise, and organizational capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of any historical civilization. The military power of Atlantis, as Plato described it, was based on a sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, naval architecture, and strategic organization that allowed them to field armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands and navies that could project power across vast ocean distances. They possessed war chariots, cavalry, and infantry equipped with bronze weapons and armor of exceptional quality, organized into military units that reflected complex hierarchical command structures. But perhaps most intriguingly, Plato attributed to the Atlanteans technologies and capabilities that seemed to anticipate developments that would not appear in the historical record for many centuries. They possessed hot and cold running water supplied by elaborate aqueduct systems, sophisticated agricultural techniques that allowed them to support large urban populations, and architectural methods that enabled the construction of massive stone buildings and defensive fortifications. The decline and destruction of Atlantis, according to Plato's narrative, resulted from moral and spiritual corruption rather than external conquest or natural disaster alone. The Atlanteans had gradually abandoned the virtuous principles that had originally guided their civilization, becoming increasingly materialistic, aggressive, and contemptuous of divine authority. Their attempts to conquer other nations, including a planned invasion of ancient Athens, ultimately provoked divine intervention that destroyed their island home and scattered their people across the earth. For over 2,000 years, scholars, explorers, and visionaries have debated whether Plato's Atlantis represented a historical memory, a philosophical allegory, or pure literary invention. The precision of his geographical and chronological details, combined with the coherence of his social and political descriptions, has convinced many readers that some historical reality must underlie his account, even if it has been transformed and elaborated through centuries of oral transmission. The search for historical analogues to Atlantis has focused attention on several ancient civilizations that possessed characteristics reminiscent of Plato's description. The Minoan civilization of Bronze Age Crete, which flourished from approximately 3,000 to 1,000 years before the Common Era, developed many of the features that Plato attributed to Atlantis, including sophisticated maritime technology, complex urban centers, and advanced artistic and architectural traditions. The Minoan palace complexes at Knossos, Phaistos, and other sites demonstrate remarkable engineering sophistication, with elaborate drainage systems, multi-story buildings, and decorative programs that suggest a wealthy and culturally refined society. The famous frescoes depicting bull-leaping ceremonies, marine life, and court ladies in elaborate costumes reveal aesthetic sensibilities that rivaled those of classical Greek art while maintaining distinctly different stylistic characteristics. The Minoans developed one of the ancient world's most advanced maritime civilizations, with trading networks that extended throughout the Mediterranean and possibly beyond. Their ships carried Minoan pottery, metalwork, and luxury goods to Egypt, the Levant, Sicily, and mainland Greece, while bringing back raw materials and exotic products that supported their island economy and cosmopolitan culture. The sudden collapse of Minoan civilization around 3,400 years ago coincided with the catastrophic eruption of the volcano Thera on the island of Santorini, one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in recorded history. This eruption, which may have been several times more powerful than the famous explosion of Krakatoa in 1883, would have devastated Minoan settlements with tsunamis, ashfalls, and seismic activity that could have effectively ended their civilization within a matter of days. The parallels between the destruction of the Minoan civilization and Plato's account of Atlantis's demise are striking enough that many scholars have proposed that memories of the Thera eruption and its impact on Minoan culture may have provided the historical foundation for Plato's narrative. The timeline, while not matching Plato's dates exactly, places the Minoan collapse within the range of ancient historical memory, particularly if the story had been transmitted through Egyptian sources that Plato claimed to have consulted. However, other researchers have looked beyond the Mediterranean for potential Atlantis candidates, proposing that Plato's story may preserve memories of even more ancient civilizations that were destroyed by the environmental catastrophes associated with the end of the Ice Age. The submerged continental shelves that we explored in our previous discussion could potentially have supported advanced civilizations that possessed some of the characteristics Plato attributed to Atlantis. The Azores Plateau in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean has attracted particular attention from Atlantis researchers because of its location in the ocean that bears the same name as Plato's lost continent. During Ice Age periods, when sea levels were much lower, some parts of this underwater plateau may have been exposed as islands or even as substantial land masses that could have supported human settlement. Geological surveys of the Azores region have revealed evidence of past subaerial exposure, including beach deposits and terrestrial sediments that indicate some areas of the current seafloor were once above water. However, the timing of this exposure appears to predate human presence in the Atlantic by many thousands of years, making it unlikely that this region could have supported the kind of advanced civilization described in Plato's account. In the Americas, some researchers have proposed that ancient civilizations like those of the Olmec, Maya, or pre-Columbian Andean cultures may have inspired legends that eventually reached the Mediterranean world and influenced Plato's creation of the Atlantis narrative. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge, advanced engineering capabilities, and complex social organizations of these American civilizations certainly possessed many characteristics that Plato attributed to Atlantis. The Olmec civilization of ancient Mexico, which flourished from approximately 3,400 to 400 years before the Common Era, developed monumental stone sculpture, complex ceremonial centers, and sophisticated water management systems that demonstrate remarkable technological capabilities. Their colossal stone heads, some weighing over 40 tons and transported across considerable distances, required engineering knowledge and organizational abilities that rivaled those of any ancient civilization. The later Maya civilization achieved even greater heights of intellectual and artistic accomplishment, developing complex writing systems, accurate astronomical calendars, and mathematical concepts that included the use of 0 centuries before this concept appeared in European mathematics. Their monumental architecture, including pyramid complexes that exceeded the scale of Egyptian pyramids, demonstrated mastery of engineering principles that allowed them to create some of the most impressive buildings in the ancient world. In South America, the pre-Columbian civilizations of the Andes achieved remarkable feats of engineering and social organization that seem almost impossible given the challenging mountain environment in which they developed. The Inca road system, extending over 25,000 miles across some of the world's most difficult terrain, required engineering solutions that modern highway builders still admire and study. The precision stone cutting and fitting techniques used in Inca architecture, exemplified by sites like Sacsayhuaman and Machu Picchu, achieved levels of accuracy that seem impossible without advanced tools and mathematical knowledge. The massive stones used in these constructions were cut and fitted with such precision that even today, centuries after their construction, it is impossible to insert a knife blade between the joints. However, the geographic separation between the Americas and the Mediterranean world makes it unlikely that detailed knowledge of American civilizations could have reached Plato through the sources he claimed to have consulted. While transoceanic contact between ancient civilizations remains a subject of ongoing research and debate, the evidence for systematic cultural exchange between the Americas and the Old World during Plato's lifetime or earlier remains limited. Another approach to understanding Atlantis has focused on the possibility that Plato's account represents a composite narrative drawing on multiple historical sources and combining them into a single fictional framework designed to illustrate philosophical points about ideal governance and the dangers of moral corruption. In this interpretation, elements of Minoan civilization, Egyptian history, contemporary Greek politics, and perhaps other cultural influences were synthesized into a coherent narrative that served Plato's pedagogical purposes while potentially preserving genuine historical memories. The influence of Atlantis on subsequent Western thought extended far beyond academic debates about its historical reality. During the Renaissance, the story inspired explorers and colonizers who hoped to discover new worlds that might correspond to Plato's descriptions. Christopher Columbus carried with him copies of classical texts that included references to Atlantis and the early European exploration of the Americas, was partly motivated by hopes of discovering the remnants of ancient advanced civilizations. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries saw renewed fascination with Atlantis as a symbol of lost golden ages and vanished wisdom. Writers, poets, and artists drew inspiration from the idea of a perfect society that had been destroyed by its own moral failures, using the Atlantis story as a framework for exploring themes of technological progress, environmental destruction, and social decay. In the modern era, the Atlantis legend has continued to evolve and inspire new forms of speculation about lost civilizations and forgotten technologies. The development of underwater archaeology, satellite imagery, and other advanced investigative techniques has provided new tools for searching for evidence of sunken cities and drowned civilizations. While discoveries of sophisticated ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey have demonstrated that complex human societies emerged much earlier in history than previously recognized, the enduring appeal of Atlantis lies partly in its representation of humanity's deepest anxieties about the fragility of civilization and the possibility that our greatest achievements might vanish without trace. In an age of climate change, environmental degradation, and technological risks that could potentially threaten the continuity of modern civilization, Plato's story of the advanced society destroyed by its own hubris resonates with contemporary concerns about sustainability and the long-term consequences of human activities. Whether Atlantis existed as a historical reality, represents a composite of multiple ancient civilizations, or stands purely as philosophical allegory, its influence on human thought about lost worlds and vanished knowledge continues to shape our understanding of the past and our expectations for the future. The story reminds us that even the most magnificent human achievements remain vulnerable to forces beyond our control, while also inspiring ongoing searches for evidence of forgotten chapters in the long story of human civilization. As we prepare to examine the geological evidence for catastrophic events that could have destroyed ancient civilizations, the Atlantis legend serves as a reminder that the boundary between myth and history is often more fluid than we might assume, and that the stories our ancestors told about lost worlds may preserve memories of real events that shaped the course of human development in ways we are still discovering. Deep beneath the sedimentary layers that record Earth's recent history, geologists have discovered evidence of events so violent and transformative that they challenge our understanding of how gradually natural processes typically unfold. These catastrophic episodes, preserved in rock formations and sediment cores from around the world, reveal that our planet has experienced periods of upheaval that dwarf any disasters witnessed during recorded human history. The geological record speaks of floods that moved continents' worth of water in a matter of days, impacts that vaporized mountains, and volcanic eruptions that altered global climate for decades at a time. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, the landscape itself tells the story of one of the most extraordinary flood events ever documented by science. The channeled scablands of eastern Washington stretch across thousands of square miles of terrain that bears the unmistakable signature of catastrophic water erosion. Here, the basalt bedrock has been carved into a maze of deep channels, enormous potholes, and isolated mesas that could only have been created by floods of almost unimaginable power and volume. For decades, conventional geological thinking insisted that these unusual landforms must have been created by gradual processes operating over millions of years. The prevailing doctrine of uniformitarianism, which held that present-day geological processes could explain all features of the Earth's surface, found it difficult to accommodate evidence of sudden, catastrophic landscape transformation. However, the work of geologist J. Harlan Bretz in the early 20th century gradually convinced the scientific community that only repeated catastrophic floods could account for the specific characteristics of the Scablands terrain. The source of these prehistoric floods was glacial Lake Missoula, a massive body of water impounded by ice dams in western Montana during the final phases of the Ice Age. When these natural barriers failed, they released volumes of water that exceeded the combined flow of all modern rivers on Earth. The resulting floods raced across Idaho and Washington at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour, carrying icebergs the size of city blocks and boulders weighing hundreds of tons as if they were mere pebbles in a stream. The evidence for these floods is written across the landscape in a language that geologists have learned to read with increasing sophistication. Giant ripple marks, some standing 50 feet high and spaced hundreds of feet apart, record the passage of floodwaters deep enough to submerge modern skyscrapers. Pendant bars of gravel and boulders deposited in the lee of hills and ridges show the direction and velocity of currents that stripped away hundreds of feet of soil and sediment in a matter of hours. The Grand Coulee, a massive canyon carved into the Columbia Plateau, serves as a temporary spillway that carried overflow from the main flood channels. This gorge, now occupied by a series of lakes, was excavated in a few days or weeks by waters that normally would have required millions of years to carve such a feature through solid basalt. The scale and speed of this erosion demonstrates the awesome power that can be unleashed when geological forces operate in catastrophic rather than gradual modes. Geological investigations have revealed that these catastrophic floods were not isolated events but occurred repeatedly throughout the final stages of the Ice Age, as the ice dam reformed and failed dozens of times over a period of several thousand years. Each flood event carved the landscape deeper and created new channels, building up the complex topography that characterizes the region today. The cumulative effect of these repeated catastrophes was to create landforms that appear utterly alien compared to terrain shaped by normal river processes. Similar evidence of catastrophic flooding has been discovered in other regions that were affected by glacial lake outburst floods during the Ice Age. In Siberia, the drainage of massive glacial lakes created flood deposits and erosional features that rival those found in North America. The Altai Mountains bear the scars of repeated catastrophic floods that occurred when ice dams impounding glacial lakes in the region failed during periods of rapid climate change. These Siberian floods carried distinctive erratic boulders across distances of hundreds of miles, depositing them in locations where they stand as monuments to the power of moving water. The flood deposits in this region contain organic materials that have been radiocarbon dated to various periods during the late Pleistocene, confirming that catastrophic flooding was a repeated occurrence as the Ice Age waned and glacial lake systems repeatedly formed and collapsed. In the North Atlantic, geological evidence points to another type of catastrophic flooding event that may have had even more dramatic consequences for human populations and global climate systems. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, suggests that the Black Sea Basin was once a much smaller freshwater lake that was catastrophically flooded when rising sea levels breached the natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. According to this hypothesis, the breach occurred around 7,600 years ago, when Mediterranean waters cascaded into the Black Sea Basin with a flow rate 200 times greater than Niagara Falls. The flooding would have raised the level of the Black Sea by hundreds of feet, inundating vast areas of coastal plain that may have supported substantial human settlements. The speed of this flooding would have forced rapid evacuation of affected populations and could have displaced hundreds of thousands of people within a matter of months. Archaeological evidence from the Black Sea region provides some support for this hypothesis, including the discovery of ancient shorelines and preserved organic materials at depths that correspond to pre-flood water levels. The preservation of wooden structures and other organic materials in the anoxic depths of the Black Sea has created a unique underwater archaeological environment that may contain evidence of the human societies that were displaced by this catastrophic flooding event. The timing of the proposed Black Sea flood coincides roughly with the development of agriculture in nearby regions and with the first appearance of complex societies in Mesopotamia and Anatolia. Some researchers have proposed that the displacement of populations from the flooded Black Sea Basin may have contributed to the spread of agricultural technology and the migration of peoples that ultimately led to the establishment of the world's first urban civilizations. Beyond these regional flooding events, the geological record preserves evidence of even more catastrophic processes that operated on global scales. The Permian Triassic extinction event, which occurred approximately 250 million years ago, eliminated over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates in what scientists call the Great Dying. This extinction appears to have been triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia that released enormous quantities of greenhouse gases and toxic compounds into the atmosphere. The Siberian traps, as these ancient volcanic deposits are known, represent one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. The eruptions continued for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing enough lava to cover an area the size of modern Europe to depths of several miles. The environmental consequences included acid rain, ozone depletion, global warming, and ocean acidification that created conditions hostile to most forms of life. More recently, the Chicxulub impact event that occurred 66 million years ago provides dramatic evidence of how extraterrestrial catastrophes can reshape Earth's biological and geological systems. The asteroid or comet that created the Chicxulub crater in Mexico was approximately 6 miles in diameter and struck the Earth with the energy equivalent of billions of nuclear weapons exploding simultaneously. The immediate effects of this impact included global wildfires, massive tsunamis, and the ejection of so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months or years, causing global cooling and the collapse of photosynthetic ecosystems. The longer-term consequences included the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs and the opening of evolutionary niches that allowed the radiation of mammalian species that ultimately led to the emergence of human beings. The geological record of this impact event is preserved in a thin layer of iridium-rich clay that can be found in rock formations around the world, marking the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. This layer contains shocked quartz crystals, microscopic diamonds, and other minerals that could only have been formed under the extreme pressures and temperatures generated by a massive impact event. Evidence for similar impact events throughout Earth's history suggests that catastrophic collisions with asteroids and comets have repeatedly influenced the course of biological evolution and geological development. The Vredefort crater in South Africa, the Sudbury crater in Canada, and dozens of other large impact structures around the world testify to the ongoing bombardment that our planet has experienced throughout its 4.5 billion year history. Recent research has also identified evidence for smaller but still significant impact events that occurred during the time frame of human history. The Tunguska event of 1908, which flattened trees across over 800 square miles of Siberian forest, demonstrates that even relatively small cosmic impacts can have dramatic local effects. Some researchers have proposed that similar events during prehistoric times could have contributed to the environmental catastrophes recorded in human flood traditions. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that a cosmic impact or airburst around 12,900 years ago may have triggered the climate reversal that initiated the Younger Dryas cooling period. This proposed event could have destabilized ice sheets, caused widespread wildfires, and contributed to the extinction of North American megafauna, creating the kind of multifaceted catastrophe that might be preserved in human cultural memory as flood narratives. Volcanic catastrophes also provide geological evidence for the kinds of sudden environmental changes that could have devastated early human societies. The Toba supervolcano eruption in Indonesia, which occurred approximately 74,000 years ago, ejected so much material into the atmosphere that it may have caused a volcanic winter lasting several years. Genetic evidence suggests that this eruption may have reduced human populations to dangerously low levels, creating a bottleneck effect that is still detectable in modern human DNA. More recent volcanic events, such as the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, demonstrate how volcanic catastrophes can affect global climate and human societies. The Tambora eruption caused the year without a summer in 1816, leading to crop failures, famine, and disease outbreaks that affected populations around the world. Similar or larger volcanic events during prehistoric times could have created the kind of widespread environmental chaos that would be remembered and transmitted through oral traditions for thousands of years. The geological record also preserves evidence of massive landslides and debris flows that could have created temporary dams and catastrophic flooding events. The Bonneville flood, triggered by the failure of a natural dam at Red Rock Pass in Idaho approximately 17,000 years ago, demonstrates how geological processes can create sudden flood events that dwarf anything in recorded history. These various lines of geological evidence combine to paint a picture of Earth's recent history that includes numerous catastrophic events capable of dramatically affecting human populations and leaving lasting impressions on cultural memory. The floods, impacts, volcanic eruptions, and other catastrophes documented in the geological record provide scientifically plausible mechanisms for the kind of worldwide environmental disasters described in flood traditions from cultures around the globe. As we examine this geological evidence for catastrophic events, we begin to see how the mythological narratives we explored earlier might preserve memories of actual environmental disasters that our ancestors experienced and transmitted to future generations. The scale, timing, and global distribution of catastrophic geological events during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene periods correspond remarkably well with the characteristics of flood traditions found in cultures around the world, suggesting that these stories may indeed preserve historical memories of real catastrophes that shaped the development of human civilization in ways we are still discovering. In the dusty halls of universities and research institutions around the world, a quiet revolution has been reshaping our understanding of human prehistory. Archaeological discoveries that seemed impossible just decades ago have forced scholars to reconsider fundamental assumptions about when complex human societies first emerged and what our ancestors were capable of achieving. Yet this legitimate scientific revolution exists alongside a parallel world of speculation, wishful thinking, and elaborate theories that attribute to ancient peoples capabilities that exceed not only what the evidence supports, but often what the laws of physics would allow. The tension between rigorous archaeological investigation and imaginative speculation about lost civilizations has created one of the most fascinating and contentious areas of modern inquiry into the human past. On one side stand professional archaeologists armed with carbon dating, stratigraphic analysis, and peer-reviewed publications, carefully documenting the gradual development of human technology and social organization. On the other side gather enthusiasts, amateur researchers, and alternative historians who see in ancient monuments and artifacts evidence of advanced technologies, lost sciences, and forgotten wisdom that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey exemplifies how legitimate archaeological breakthroughs can challenge conventional timelines while also inspiring speculative theories that extend far beyond what the evidence actually supports. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating this site in the 1990s, he uncovered massive stone pillars carved with intricate reliefs of animals and mysterious symbols, arranged in circular enclosures that appeared to serve ceremonial or religious purposes. The revolutionary aspect of Göbekli Tepe lies not in any evidence of advanced technology, but in its age. Radiocarbon dating places the site's construction at approximately 11,600 years ago, making it significantly older than Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, or any other major stone monument previously known to archaeology. This dating pushes back the emergence of monumental architecture by several millennia and suggests that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of much more complex social organization and engineering projects than previously recognized. The implications of Göbekli Tepe for understanding prehistoric human capabilities are profound but specific. The site demonstrates that people living in small mobile groups could coordinate their efforts to create permanent monuments requiring substantial labor investment and sophisticated planning. The artistic sophistication of the carved reliefs reveals aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic thinking that challenges stereotypical views of Stone Age mentality. The site's apparent abandonment and deliberate burial around 8,000 years ago suggests complex ritual practices and possibly revolutionary changes in religious or social organization. However, the legitimate archaeological significance of Göbekli Tepe has also inspired speculative theories that attribute to its builders capabilities for which no evidence exists. Some alternative researchers have proposed that the site's astronomical alignments indicate advanced knowledge of celestial mechanics, that its carved symbols represent a form of prehistoric writing, or that its construction required technologies that have since been lost to human civilization. These speculative interpretations often rely on selective reading of archaeological evidence, ignoring the extensive documentation that shows how the site fits within the known trajectory of human cultural development in Anatolia. The actual archaeological record reveals continuities between Göbekli Tepe and earlier and later sites in the region, demonstrating that its builders were part of ongoing cultural traditions rather than representatives of a lost advanced civilization. Similar patterns of legitimate discovery inspiring speculative interpretation can be seen in research on other ancient sites around the world. The massive stone blocks used in construction at Pumapunku in Bolivia, some weighing over 100 tons and cut with remarkable precision, represent genuine achievements in ancient engineering and stoneworking technology. However, the documented capabilities of pre-Columbian Andean civilizations, including their sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and metallurgy, provide adequate explanation for these achievements without requiring recourse to lost technologies or extraterrestrial intervention. The precision-cut stones at Pumapunku were shaped using techniques that have been documented at other Andean sites, including the use of harder stones as cutting tools, sand and water as abrasives, and copper and bronze implements for final finishing work. The transportation of massive blocks was accomplished using methods that, while requiring substantial organization and engineering knowledge, fall well within the demonstrated capabilities of ancient human societies. The tendency to attribute impossible capabilities to ancient civilizations often stems from underestimating the ingenuity and persistence of human beings working with apparently primitive tools. Modern experimental archaeology has demonstrated that skilled craftspeople using traditional techniques can achieve results that seem impossible to observers unfamiliar with these methods. The construction of Easter Island's Moai statues, long considered mysterious, has been successfully replicated using only the tools and techniques available to the island's original inhabitants. Yet the search for evidence of advanced antediluvian knowledge continues to attract researchers who believe that mainstream archaeology has overlooked or deliberately ignored evidence of prehistoric high technology. These investigations have produced elaborate theories about ancient aircraft, nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, and global communication systems that supposedly existed thousands of years before their historical development. The ancient Indian texts known as the Vedas and Puranas have become particular focal points for such speculation, with some researchers interpreting poetic descriptions of flying vehicles called vimanas as evidence of prehistoric aviation technology. These texts describe various types of aerial vehicles with different capabilities and propulsion systems, sometimes providing what appear to be technical specifications for their construction and operation. However, scholarly analysis of these texts reveals that the Vimana descriptions follow the conventions of Sanskrit poetry and mythology, using symbolic language and fantastical imagery to convey spiritual and philosophical meanings rather than literal technical information. The texts that contain the most detailed Vimana descriptions, such as the Vaimanika Shastra, were actually composed in the early 20th century and represent modern attempts to project contemporary aviation concepts back into ancient Sanskrit literature. Similar misinterpretations have been applied to ancient texts from other cultures, with researchers claiming to find evidence of advanced technology in sources ranging from the Bible to Sumerian mythology. The Book of Ezekiel's description of a divine chariot with wheels within wheels has been interpreted as a description of alien spacecraft, while Sumerian references to the Anunnaki gods have been recast as accounts of ancient astronauts who genetically modified human beings. These interpretations typically involve selective quotation of ancient texts while ignoring the broader literary, religious, and cultural contexts that provide more conventional explanations for seemingly anomalous passages. The tendency to read modern technological concepts into ancient poetic and mythological language reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how different cultures have used symbolic and metaphorical expression to convey meaning. The search for physical evidence of lost high technology has focused attention on various archaeological anomalies that seem to challenge conventional understanding of prehistoric capabilities. The so-called Baghdad Battery, a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod discovered in Iraq, has been interpreted by some researchers as evidence that ancient Mesopotamians possessed knowledge of electrochemistry and may have used galvanic cells for electroplating or other technological applications. However, experimental replications of the Baghdad battery have demonstrated that while the object can generate small electrical currents when filled with acidic solution, the voltage and amperage produced are far too weak to support practical applications like electroplating. Alternative explanations, including use as a storage container for sacred scrolls or as a ritualistic object, provide more plausible accounts of the artifact's original purpose. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera, represents a more legitimate example of sophisticated ancient technology that initially seemed to exceed the known capabilities of its time period. This complex bronze device, dating to approximately 2,000 years ago, contains dozens of interlocking gears that were used to calculate the positions of celestial bodies and predict astronomical events. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that ancient Greek craftsmen had developed remarkably sophisticated mechanical engineering capabilities, including the ability to create precision gear trains and complex calculating devices. However, rather than representing impossible lost technology, the mechanism fits well within the documented trajectory of Greek mathematical and astronomical knowledge, representing an ingenious application of principles and techniques that were well established in Hellenistic science. The difference between the Antikythera mechanism and speculative claims about ancient high technology lies in the availability of supporting evidence and contextual understanding. The mechanism can be studied directly, its construction techniques analyzed, and its capabilities tested through physical examination and experimental replication. Its existence is supported by extensive documentation of Greek mathematical and astronomical knowledge from the same time period. In contrast, claims about ancient nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, or aircraft rely on highly speculative interpretations of ambiguous textual passages and archaeological evidence that can be more plausibly explained through conventional understanding of ancient capabilities. The absence of physical remains, chemical residues, or technological infrastructure that would inevitably result from such advanced technologies argues strongly against their historical existence. The legitimate archaeological evidence for sophisticated prehistoric achievements continues to expand as new discoveries and improved analytical techniques reveal previously unknown aspects of ancient human capabilities. The precision astronomy of sites like Nabta Playa in Egypt, dating to approximately 7,000 years ago, demonstrates that African peoples developed complex understanding of celestial cycles much earlier than previously recognized. The sophisticated metallurgy of ancient Anatolian sites reveals advanced knowledge of ore processing and alloy production that enabled the creation of high-quality bronze and iron tools. These genuine discoveries of prehistoric sophistication follow predictable patterns of gradual technological development and cultural evolution, building upon earlier achievements and contributing to later developments in ways that can be traced through the archaeological record. They represent human ingenuity and persistence rather than impossible technological leaps or intervention by outside agencies. The search for antediluvian knowledge has also been influenced by misunderstandings about the capabilities and achievements of indigenous peoples around the world. The astronomical knowledge of Maya civilization, the engineering achievements of Inca architecture, and the navigational expertise of Polynesian seafarers have all been attributed to lost ancient wisdom or extraterrestrial influence rather than being recognized as products of sophisticated indigenous scientific and technological traditions. This tendency reflects deeper cultural biases that have difficulty acknowledging the intellectual and technological achievements of non-European civilizations, leading to explanations that attribute their accomplishments to outside influence rather than recognizing them as products of human creativity and systematic investigation of natural phenomena. As we prepare to examine what archaeology actually reveals about early complex societies, we can appreciate both the legitimate revolution in understanding that is currently reshaping prehistoric studies and the need for rigorous evaluation of claims about ancient achievements. The human story is proving to be far more complex and interesting than previously recognized, but the actual evidence points toward a gradual development of human capabilities rather than the existence of lost high-technology civilizations. The search for antediluvian knowledge continues to reveal remarkable aspects of human prehistoric achievement, while also demonstrating the importance of distinguishing between evidence-based discovery and speculative interpretation. In our quest to understand the past, we must remain open to revolutionary discoveries while maintaining the critical thinking skills necessary to evaluate extraordinary claims against the standards of evidence and logical consistency that guide all serious scientific inquiry. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between darkness and light, we find ourselves at the end of our journey through the deep waters of human memory. We have traveled from the sacred texts of ancient civilizations to the cutting-edge laboratories of modern science, from the sunken ruins beneath the waves to the geological scars carved into continents by forces that dwarf human comprehension. Throughout this exploration, one element has remained constant, flowing like a silver thread through every story, every discovery, every moment of wonder and revelation. That element is water itself, in all its forms and manifestations, as the keeper of our deepest memories and the author of our most enduring fears. Water remembers. Not in the mystical sense sometimes claimed by those who seek hidden properties in its molecular structure, but in ways both more subtle and more profound than such speculations suggest. Water remembers in the ice cores of Greenland, where each annual layer preserves a record of ancient atmospheres and climates stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. It remembers in the sediment cores pulled from ocean floors, where microscopic shells and pollen grains tell stories of changing seas and vanished continents. It remembers in the underground aquifers that hold fossil water from Ice Age rains, and in the salt deposits left behind by seas that dried up millions of years ago. But perhaps most importantly for our inquiry into antediluvian civilizations, water remembers in the stories that human beings have told about it across every culture and through every generation. These stories, as we have seen, share remarkable similarities that transcend the boundaries of geography, language, and historical period. From the Mesopotamian scribes who first carved the Epic of Gilgamesh into clay tablets, to the Aboriginal songlines that preserve memories of drowned Australian coastlines, human cultures have consistently used narratives of great waters to encode their deepest understandings of change, loss, survival, and renewal. The universality of flood narratives suggests something more profound than mere coincidence or cultural borrowing. These stories appear to tap into fundamental patterns of human experience and memory that operate at levels deeper than conscious recollection. They speak to our recognition that water, more than any other natural force, possesses the power to utterly transform the world we know, washing away the familiar and creating new landscapes that bear little resemblance to what came before. Throughout our exploration, we have seen how scientific investigation has begun to provide plausible explanations for the geological and environmental events that might have inspired these ancient memories. The end of the last ice age brought changes to Earth's surface that were both rapid and dramatic by any standard. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters, claiming continental shelves larger than entire modern countries. Massive glacial lakes burst their barriers and released floods that carved new river channels through solid rock in a matter of days. Climate systems shifted so dramatically that entire ecosystems disappeared while new ones emerged in their place. These transformations occurred within the time frame of human history, affecting populations that possessed the cognitive capabilities to observe, remember, and transmit their experiences to future generations. The archaeological evidence for human presence on the now submerged continental shelves, while still fragmentary, suggests that substantial populations may have been displaced by rising seas. The sophisticated knowledge systems preserved in various indigenous cultures indicate that our ancestors possessed detailed understanding of environmental processes and possessed effective methods for preserving and transmitting this knowledge across many generations. And yet our investigation has also revealed the importance of distinguishing between legitimate scientific discovery and speculative interpretation. While the archaeological record continues to surprise us with evidence of prehistoric human sophistication, the actual artifacts and sites discovered to date support a picture of gradual cultural development rather than the existence of lost high-technology civilizations. The remarkable achievements of ancient peoples, from the astronomical precision of Nabta Playa to the engineering sophistication of Göbekli Tepe, represent human ingenuity and persistence rather than impossible technological leaps. The underwater archaeological sites we have explored, from the submerged structures off the coast of India to the mysterious terraces near Japan, provide tantalizing glimpses of coastal civilizations that were drowned by rising seas. However, the evidence from these sites, while suggestive of complex human activities, does not support claims of advanced technologies or capabilities that exceeded those documented in the historical record. Instead, they reveal the existence of sophisticated maritime adaptations and coastal settlements that were ultimately overwhelmed by environmental changes beyond their control. The geological record of catastrophic events provides a scientific framework for understanding how dramatic environmental changes could have generated the traumatic memories preserved in flood traditions. The repeated outburst floods from glacial lakes, the massive volcanic eruptions that altered global climate, and the impact events that periodically devastated regional ecosystems all represent the kinds of catastrophic processes that could have profoundly affected human populations and left lasting impressions on cultural memory. These geological catastrophes help explain not only why flood narratives appear in cultures around the world, but also why these stories often describe the destruction of more advanced or morally superior antediluvian civilizations. Populations that had achieved relative stability and cultural sophistication would have been particularly vulnerable to sudden environmental changes that disrupted their resource bases and forced rapid adaptation to new conditions. The loss of accumulated knowledge, specialized crafts, and complex social institutions during such upheavals could indeed have created the impression that earlier peoples possessed capabilities that were subsequently lost. The search for antediluvian knowledge, as we have seen, continues to inspire both legitimate scientific investigation and speculative theories that extend far beyond what the evidence supports. The tension between these approaches reflects deeper questions about human nature and our relationship with the past. We seem driven to believe that our ancestors possessed wisdom or capabilities that we have lost, that there was once a golden age when human beings lived in harmony with natural forces and possessed understanding that we have forgotten in our pursuit of material progress. This persistent belief in lost wisdom may reflect psychological truths about human experience that transcend questions of historical accuracy. The flood narratives and antediluvian traditions that appear in cultures around the world often function as more than simple historical accounts. They serve as repositories of cultural values, as warnings about the consequences of moral corruption, and as reassurances that human beings can survive even the most overwhelming disasters through wisdom, courage, and divine assistance. The metaphorical power of water in these traditions extends far beyond its role as an agent of physical destruction. Water serves as a symbol of transformation, purification, and renewal. It represents the unconscious forces that lie beneath the surface of rational thought, the depths of memory that preserve experiences too profound for ordinary language to express. In psychological terms, the Great Flood often functions as a symbol of the overwhelming emotions or revelations that periodically sweep away our familiar patterns of thought and behavior, forcing us to reconstruct our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. The antediluvian world in this metaphorical reading represents not necessarily a historical reality, but a psychological state of innocence or integration that preceded our current condition of separation and struggle. The flood becomes a symbol of the catastrophic events, whether personal or collective, that shatter this original wholeness and force us to develop new capabilities for survival and adaptation in a more challenging and fragmented world. Yet the power of these narratives may also derive from their preservation of genuine historical memories, however transformed and elaborated they may have become through thousands of years of oral transmission. The environmental catastrophes documented in the geological record were real events that affected real human populations. The rising seas that claimed the continental shelves displaced actual communities and destroyed actual settlements. The massive floods that carved the channeled scablands of Washington and similar features around the world occurred within the time frame of human habitation of these regions. The people who experienced these catastrophic events possessed the same cognitive capabilities that we do today. They had the same capacity for observation, memory, and storytelling that allows us to preserve and transmit our experiences to future generations. There is no reason to assume that traumatic events of the magnitude documented in the geological record would not have left lasting impressions on the cultures that survived them. The consistency of flood traditions across cultures that had no known contact with one another suggests that these narratives may indeed preserve memories of actual environmental catastrophes, however much these memories may have been transformed through the processes of cultural transmission. The specific details that recur in flood narratives from different parts of the world, such as the sending forth of birds to test for dry land, the preservation of animals and plants, and the landing of survival vessels on mountain peaks may reflect common human responses to catastrophic flooding rather than cultural borrowing or coincidental invention. As we conclude our exploration of antediluvian civilizations and the great flood traditions that preserve their memory, we find ourselves in a position of respectful uncertainty. The scientific evidence clearly documents that our planet has experienced environmental catastrophes of the magnitude described in flood traditions, and that these catastrophes occurred within the time frame of human history. Archaeological evidence increasingly reveals that prehistoric human societies achieved levels of sophistication that were previously unrecognized, though this sophistication appears to have emerged through gradual cultural development rather than through sudden technological leaps or outside intervention. The flood narratives themselves remain both historical documents and mythological constructs, preserving genuine memories of environmental catastrophe while also serving as vehicles for cultural values, psychological insights, and spiritual truths that transcend questions of literal accuracy. They remind us that human civilization, no matter how advanced or seemingly permanent, remains vulnerable to forces beyond our control. They also testify to our species' remarkable capacity for survival, adaptation, and cultural preservation in the face of overwhelming challenges. Perhaps there was indeed no single great flood that destroyed a unified antediluvian civilization and forced humanity to begin again from scattered survivors. But there were many floods, many catastrophes, many moments when the familiar world was swept away and new realities had to be constructed from whatever fragments could be preserved. Each of these events carved itself into memory, becoming part of the great reservoir of human experience from which we continue to draw wisdom, warning, and hope. Water, in all its forms and manifestations, continues to shape our world and challenge our assumptions about the permanence of human achievement. The rising seas of our current era, driven by climate changes that our own activities have accelerated, remind us that we are not so different from our ancestors who faced the melting of the great ice sheets and the flooding of their coastal settlements. We too must learn to adapt to environmental changes that seem to exceed our capacity to control or predict. In the memory of water, we find both warning and promise. The warning is that no human achievement, no matter how magnificent, is immune to the transformative power of natural forces. The promise is that human beings have survived and thrived through catastrophic changes before, preserving what is most essential while adapting to new conditions and creating new possibilities for flourishing. The antediluvian world, whether understood as historical reality or mythological symbol, continues to speak to us across the millennia. It reminds us that we are part of a story much larger and longer than our individual lives, a story that includes both triumph and tragedy, creation and destruction, loss and renewal. In listening to these ancient voices preserved in flood traditions and archaeological remains, we gain perspective on our own challenges and inspiration for facing whatever changes the future may bring. Water itself becomes the language of our deepest fears and oldest histories, the medium through which we remember not only where we have come from but also who we might yet become.